Hi, everyone. I'm James Ead. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. This season, we're going to talk about roar, which is finding your voice. Not everyone is able to lift their voice today, and we want to encourage you to be able to speak up, speak out, and to share your mind without fear or favor. And a little bit about myself, that I've written 8 books. The only bestseller among them is Chess for Dummies, and I am a chess nerd. This is me in high school. This is me just a couple of years ago. So, but what we're talking about today is roaring, having the ability to speak up. Now, I also am a recovering addict, and I always think that it's time to talk about that and not be ashamed. And, because it's a scourge across the nation, many families have been affected by it. And why can't we talk about it? And so in my recovery, this is me in Madison Square, in Times Square. This is me last year in Las Vegas, getting awards and all that kind of stuff. And my one of my most recent books, this was in 2023. I've written 2 that were published last year, but it's Freedom, Your Path to Recovery. Because what works for me may not work for you, and what works for you may not work for me. But we can all human beings have the power and potential to recover. So now, what is it about roar that I want to talk about? Well, I think that there's a lot of people that are being scared and almost a little paranoid about what's going on in our country today. And they're afraid to speak up. And if they stay quiet, the man won't come and take them away. And this is a Buffalo Springfield reference to date myself. But it's something I wanted to talk about with Rick Rosner. Rick, how are you today?
Good.
And what do you think about this? Is it my imagination, or are people afraid?
So this is an issue for me every day where I've been on Twitter for 15 years. Twitter used to be a fun place. And now it's just a place for right-wing lunatics because Elon Musk, who is a right-wing white nationalist lunatic and also the world's richest guy, he bought the thing and he brought back all the people who got kicked off for spreading hate. And so there's a lot of that on there. And then a lot of the libs abandoned Twitter, X. But I'm sticking in there because I'm too lazy to try to build something someplace else. But instead of sharing jokes, mostly I'm saying pissy stuff about the current administration. And but I hold myself back because I assume there's an FBI file on me because I've got a lot of followers on X, and I'm not famous, but I'm like on the very farthest outskirts of fame, and I assume that they might be keeping track of me. And my wife is even more nervous than I am.
Mm-hmm.
So before on X, which is where I spend more time on X. It's the only social medium I spend any time on.
Okay.
But before I fave something, before I repost something, before I write something myself, I'm like, is this really necessary? Is this going to change anything? Is this going to possibly be used against me? Because we have a kid who lives overseas. And so we, once or twice a year, we'll go visit and we'll leave the country. And then and when we go out of the country, I make sure that I don't have X, Twitter on my phone. So if we get stopped at the border by U.S. Customs, they can't look at my social media. And so, yeah, this is something I think about a lot.
Right.
You and I were of the age. You mentioned a Buffalo Springsteen,
Yes.
Springfield song
Springfield.
from the late '60s, maybe even 1970. We were kids back then, and I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which was a hotbed of hippies and Vietnam War protests. I remember in 6th grade, the 2 coolest kids in the class their parents let them go to a riot and they got tear gassed, and I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There were two
And
girls in my junior high class, the 7th grade, that wore black armbands, and
yeah,
they got taken to the principal and had to take them off. But I thought they were so cool.
yeah, and those protests were, maybe the last time in U.S. history where mass protests eventually maybe cause some political change.
I agree.
We
Yeah.
have a lot of protests now, but I have a hard time seeing that they're certainly not dissuading Trump from doing anything.
Yeah, although there has been a little bit of a backlash, but I agree. I have been, we grew up. I had my political awakening with Nixon and the Vietnam War, and we felt that we were making a change at that time. I was a little young for that, but my older sister was 4 years older than I was, so I knew some of her friends, and they were active and kind of late hippie kind of stages, and as an aside, we were, I was, prepubescent during the Summer of Love, so we kind of missed the miniskirt era. But I remember culottes and hot pants. Do you remember that?
I like hot pants. I loathed culottes. Culottes are like knee-length trousers with flares, and then you wear them with knee-high boots, and that look just didn't give me anywhere near a boner. I did not like it.
Yeah.
But hot
Okay.
pants. And,
Hot pants.
and Daisy Dukes a few years later cut off. I mean, growing up,
blue jeans.
When people wear cut off jeans now, they cut them off 2, 3, 4 inches below the crotch. Back in the 60s, when people wore 70s, when people wore cut off jeans, they cut them off right at the crotch, and so that your butt would fall out.
Well, I remember this because I always wondered, like, a lot of men in my age were into breasts and rated women based on their breast size, but I was always a leg guy. And do you think
I'm a leg and butt guy, and I had a couple unfortunate early incidents seeing real boobs and not liking it because, like one time we went to the San Diego Zoo on a family trip, and next to us was like a group of hippies in like 1970, and so in 1970 I'd seen a lot of issues of Playboy magazine. And the boobs were always, hefty and perfect. And these hippies, one hippie girl that was wearing pajamas, which was shocking in 1970.
Right.
But I ended up seeing a couple hippie girls then, and another time I ended up seeing down there their shirts, because hippies and those boobs, they weren't Playboy magazine boobs, and I was like, whoa, that's, and I was shocked and disturbed. Not that I had, I was a 10-year-old mess, and nobody was going to get with me anyway. But who was I to judge? Right. Another time, I was in Boulder, and I saw a girl slip in the mud, and she landed on her butt, and she was wearing a tube top, and her tube top fell down. And she didn't have any boobs at all. She just had nipples. And I'm like, what the heck? And because, well,
one of the things about growing up in the 70s was women were, it was a, feminism was, it was like a post-feminism period where they weren't militant, but they were like free. They felt free to express their sexuality. And they felt like they were free to tell us, don't talk about women's boobs, and get in our faces about it. They were able to roar, and they had the power.
Well, okay, so you have you can either call it second wave or third wave feminism,
right?
And a lot of that came out of women being pissed off by being like ignored by student radical movements and war protests where the guys took over, and even though they were supposed to be, in favor of liberating Vietnam, liberating the U.S., and they still treated the women like guys had treated women for the hundreds. Anyway, the guys were still shitty, and so I'm looking it up. Ms. Magazine was founded in 1971. So you have student radicalism. You got the protests
Right.
are starting in really getting momentum in 67, 68.
Yeah.
But then a few years
Fortet in Ohio, another ancient reference.
Yeah, but then in the very early 70s, women are like, well, fuck you. You guys are treating us no better than Republicans treated us, and so
ignored or objectified.
Yeah. So you've got this big feminist movement that runs, through the 70s, and then ends up by the late 70s, runs up against Phyllis Schlafly and the people who came out, Anita Bryant,
Yes.
these Republican activists who successfully campaigned to stop the Equal Rights Amendment from passing.
Well, I still can't believe it didn't.
Yeah. And so another thing is America in the 70s, people were skinny. Now in America, 70% of adult Americans are overweight or obese. And that may start reversing with Ozempic and all these drugs. Mm-hmm. But in the 70s, I don't know, maybe 15% of Americans were overweight, abused, or obese. And it was the Charlie's Angels era,
right?
And people had no butt. People, the sex symbols of the time were these blonde ladies with no asses, because they were skinny, and also and not much in the way of boobs, so no people wouldn't wear bras. There was a show called Challenge of the Network Stars, where they took all the TV stars of the time and had them compete in Olympic type sports. And that was a festival of wet T-shirts and swimsuits and no bras. And Charlie's Angels was a no bra show. And but American, our sex symbols were 102 pounds.
Yeah This is true. But what do you think of the No Kings protests that are going on now? There seems to be a lot of activity around that. And
I think we are hampered geographically and also because of our huge population. So there's a tradition of striking in France and the UK and just all across Europe, where you have all these countries that are 1/5, 1/6 the size of our country. And when one group goes out on strike, sometimes there's a sympathy strike, and they can shut down the whole country. A few times a year in the UK, the trains stop running because of strikes. And within a couple of days, the strike achieves its intended end. The country, shuts down. We can't shut down the U.S., where we've got a population of 345 million. The U.S. is 3,000 miles wide, 1,500 miles north to south, and it's just too big to shut down. Plus, we've got 50 states with wildly different politics.
Absolutely.
So it's really tough to have collective action paralyze the country to the point that the government feels compelled to respond.
All right. Because I think that, and maybe it was just because I was a part of it in the Vietnam era. I felt like we were affecting change, but then it sort of soured into that things kind of went back to normal, status quo-ish.
Because the boomers were the protesters of the time.
Right.
The boomers were 20 years old in the 70s, And then we all grew up to be kind of selfish a-holes. Now, not entirely. I mean, but we have all the money. We had good jobs at a time when, before like all the money had been squeezed out of jobs. We've benefited from improvements in medicine, so we don't die so much. So we hang out into our 70s and 80s. It used to be that, the elders would die and pass on their assets. But 94% of the privately held assets in America are held by people 45 years and older. And it's a problem.
It is. It's hard to imagine people getting started today. It was hard enough when I did. And, the prices are out through the roof. When we bought our last home in the 90s, I thought they put an extra zero on by mistake. But, one of the things I think I take a little comfort in is they seem to have overreached with ICE in Minneapolis. And there seems to have been enough of the federal government tried to paint the last victim as a terrorist. And it turns out the guy was practically a saint. And, all the stuff that they came out with to justify shooting him 10 times when he was already pinned to the ground was like, all this, nonsense and lies and vile lies at that about this man. And he was coming to the aid of a woman who was getting pepper sprayed. And, in any case, it seems to have been enough even for some Republicans in Congress, which maybe they can grow a spine and say no to some of the worst offenders. I know I haven't kept up with it most recent, but I don't know if ICE is coming up for refunding, and I don't know what the status of that is.
Okay, so for the entire run of ICE, they've gotten $6 to $9 billion a year until Trump, and he raised ICE funding to $85 billion a year. So they are now the best funded of any police agency in the country. But they're run incompetently. They're putting agents on the street with as little as 4 weeks of training. And they're failing to run adequate background checks. So you got guys out there who maybe don't even have high school diplomas. And you can argue, okay, well, maybe there are good guys who didn't graduate high school, but there are also a lot of psycho incompetent guys who didn't graduate high school. But I want to talk about the demographic strategies of where you put ICE. Trump tried to surge the military and ICE into Los Angeles. Right. And there was a lot of pushback. And he kind of had to back down. But Los Angeles has a population of 8 million. Minneapolis has a population of a little over 400,000. The normal on the street number of cops in Minneapolis is 600. It takes only 600 cops to patrol the city. But they flooded Minneapolis with 2,000 to 3,000 ICE and Border Patrol, and they were able to exert their will and, do what they wanted because of the demographic advantage. And then they were looking at Maine, the largest city, to do a similar surge until people got pissed off about it. The largest city in Maine has 70,000 people. So they would have been able to, they're also doing that shit in Portland, Oregon, which has a population of 650,000. So it's similar to there's one reason the Germans picked on the Jews is that the Jews were 1% of the population and they could be overwhelmed. And it's similar with the Somalis. The Somalis are a small, scary looking group of people. They look scary because they're skinny. Their necks are teeny. You remember them from being scary in what is it, Captain Roberts, or what was it called, the Tom Hanks movie, where they Somali pirates took over a ship. So they're an easy boogeyman. There aren't many of them. So You don't piss off a whole segment of the country. You picked a teeny. So also they're picking all these northern states. The further south you go, the more illegals you have in a state. Florida has 1.2 million, Texas 2 million, California 2.9 million, compared to Maine 10,000, and Minnesota 100,000. So for every illegal in Maine, you have 120 illegals in Florida. So why pick on Maine? Because it's small and you can overwhelm it, and also it's a purple state,
and Trump is targeting these things because out of spite in some cases, like Minneapolis made him mad.
He just announced he's closing the Kennedy Center for 2 years out of spite. He says for renovations because it's dilapidated, even though they spent $250 million renovating it in 2019. So he's full of shit there. And Trump said when he was running for president that his second term would be about vengeance.
Yeah.
So
why are we surprised?
Which circles back to the topic of this show about speaking out or being afraid to speak out. Because like Don Lemon, one of the most mild-mannered. So he reported from a protest within a MAGA church in Minneapolis, I think. And they're charging him with being part of the protest, and he was going to turn himself in, but they didn't let him do that. They took him into custody. There's a lot of just effing with Trump, effing with his enemies.
Right. And also, to my knowledge, we haven't declared war on Venezuela, but we've used stealth fighters to destroy boats who were without any evidence, but may have been carrying drugs. But there's rules for engagement in any military encounter, and those certainly weren't followed.
So who's going to enforce that? Nobody's going to.
Well, this is the thing: is Trump does not think that there are any repercussions. He's got reason to believe that. But blowing people out of the water is an act of murder. Going into a country and taking their president and his wife is an act of kidnapping, and seizing oil or other resources off of ships that are sailing in international waters is piracy. And there's no two ways of looking at that in my mind. These are illegal acts, and certainly the violation of international law. And he's thrown international law out the window. He doesn't care what the Congress thinks, what the judges think.
So international law does not apply to the U.S. because we choose to ignore it whenever it's convenient, whenever it runs. So the UN has no authority over us,
right?
Because we don't recognize its authority.
And no consequences.
And Trump does a lot of during Biden's administration, the Republicans, James Comer in the House, Jim Jordan, were always accusing Biden of having these kickback schemes via his kid Hunter, who was paid a really healthy salary to be on the board of a Ukrainian oil company. And they said it was all a scheme to get millions of bucks to pay off Joe. But the New Yorker's been doing and none of that was proven. Probably because, Hunter got paid a ton of money, but Joe was not part of that, right? Because Joe had been in politics for 50 years and knew better. And in the 4 years that Biden was out of politics, between when he was VP and then when he was president, he and his wife made $17 million. They made more than $2 million a year giving speeches and writing books. That's what, if you're an important politician, people will pay you $100,000, $200,000 to come give a speech.
Yeah.
And you can say, well, that's like sleazy and whatever, but it's legit. You're making money legitimately. And so why would Joe Biden's not a genius, but he's smart enough to not jeopardize his entire political, life by taking, kickbacks of $100,000 when he can make millions a year legitimately. So I always thought that was bullshit. And it is, because if it weren't bullshit, the Republicans would have brought charges. However, in the first year of Trump, the New Yorker has been tracking how much money Trump and family have been making through hinky deals.
I've seen
and
it.
Through August, he and his family had made $3.4 billion, and they just did a January update, and they've in the four subsequent months they made another 600 million. They're up to 4 billion. And so some of these deals are illegal, but nobody's going to enforce them. Some of them are just unseemly, unprecedented. Like, you're not supposed to take gifts as president, but some companies will give Trump $1 million in stock in their company, hoping that, when it comes time to regulate them, he'll go easy on them. Yeah. Like, Trump used to be anti-crypto, but in the past year, he and his kids have become involved in 6 different crypto schemes.
Yeah.
And he's now very pro-crypto.
Yeah.
And is what he's doing illegal? It's probably illegal, but nobody's going to enforce it. And if it's not illegal, it's unseemly. And again, he's not going to, his base doesn't care. The Republicans in Congress don't care.
He's been convicted felon, over 30 felony charges, and there
doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. I know Teddy Roosevelt said that the presidency was a bully pulpit. Well, Trump thought he meant something else than Teddy did when he thinks of being a bully, because he thinks he can bully other countries into doing what he wants. And the ones that push back, like China, for example, he retreats. And so there was a phrase going around, taco, is it Trump always chickens out? And nobody seems to notice how his bite is not so loud as his bark is. And there are countries that are resisting. And this latest stuff with Greenland also seems to be successfully being resisted. I don't know.
Well, Trump announced victory.
Oh,
Trump announced that So he announced that we'll be able to do whatever we want on Greenland.
Yeah. Well, that was always
all right, so
military bases, and
So the deal is that he didn't get anything from Greenland. I'm not sure he even negotiated with anybody from Greenland or Denmark, which has, co-dominion kind of. There was a treaty signed at the beginning of World War I, 1941, that let us build. They wanted the help, and we needed the output that let us build bases in Greenland.
Right.
And by the end, there was we caught some German infiltrators on the coast of Greenland who were there to run weather stations, because the weather that hits Greenland hits the North Atlantic maybe 48 hours later, so they would know if it was safe to operate their subs. So they caught a couple little teams of German weather people. But by the end of World War II, the U.S. had 17 bases on Greenland. And in 1951, we signed a new treaty with Greenland in the middle of the Cold War, because again, you wanted a bunch of radar stations and such, because if nukes are going to fly from Russia, some of them are going to fly over Greenland. Right. So probably by the mid 50s, we probably had 20 bases on Greenland and in Greenland, whatever. And now we're down to 1. But if we want to put another 20 bases there, by the treaty of 1951, Greenland would love that. It means having a bunch of Americans stationed in Greenland, helps their economy. They don't care. They're not resisting that. If we wanted to build a good sized base with 2,000 people, and bring your family, so that's another 1,000 people, add 3,000 people to Greenland. Greenland's like, yeah, come on, we'll sell you fish.
Well, this is when you're in good relations with other countries such as Denmark. These types of things, if you want them, they would be more than willing to let you do it. But Trump has a habit of dividing our country, but uniting the rest of the world against us. So he's managed to alienate everyone who does live in Greenland and in Denmark as well. He just manages to make it so that they don't want to cooperate with us. So it's almost like us against the world. And that's never been the proposition. We've never tried to do that in any other presidency, to my knowledge. It's one of those things that strikes me as when is it going to be that the American citizens say enough is enough? We don't want to be perceived this way. These are not part of the traditional values that this country was founded on or that we grew up believing. And it's someone who I cannot believe he was reelected, but he has to go. And I think most people have come to some sort of realization I don't think his approval rating is very high right now.
His approval rating is at the lowest of his second term and is lower than even at this point in his first term, but it's still at 41%. And
so roughly 1/3 of the country is pro-Trump, no matter what he does.
Well, let's look at Germany. So when the Allies conquered Germany, which was in ruins at the end of World War II, they engaged in denazification. They left 1 million troops in Germany to enforce a new order where Nazism was illegal, Nazi symbols illegal. You couldn't belong to the Nazi party anymore. And we helped Germany rebuild, and Germany became one of the great nations for the past 70 years. It's like, I think, the 7th best place to live in the world. It's a nice place. And I've been tweeting, cleaning out the Jews did not make Germany great. Cleaning out the Nazis made Germany great, but they didn't really clean them out. They just shut them up. That they're probably, 10% of the population probably remain Nazi in their heart after 15 years of propaganda. But they just had to shut up about it because it was illegal to talk about it. And these people got old and died. And, eventually you had new generations come in. And that's the deal with MAGA. Maybe 15% of American adults will never quit being MAGA, even after Trump disappears from the scene. They will go to their graves believing in MAGA. And that's a problem. You can't turn them around. Also, every day, faced with, there was an SNL skit about this over the weekend. Every day, a few thousand of the more reasonable MAGAs reluctantly take little baby steps away from MAGA because Trump is not doing much of what they voted for him to do. He did shut down the border, but that's about it. Everything else is this stupid fucking around with the Kennedy Center. So when the more reasonable people peel away day by day, what's left, the average IQ gets lower among the MAGAs, and the average level of crazy goes up because you're just slicing away the smarter and the less crazy people.
Right. I think that there's a great deal to be said for people that could believe what Trump was telling them. Certainly the first time he was elected, I really wasn't that surprised. But, it was based on myth. He's a great businessman. Well, he declared bankruptcy 6 times. His dad bailed him out more than once. So, I don't, and every endeavor that he has tried, Trump University was found to be fraudulent, and Trump vodka and Trump steaks and Trump Bibles, they never was successful. So, his track record is one of chaos and collapse.
Trump's followers either don't hear about his shortcomings, or they have excuses, or simply just don't believe. Like Trump has been accused of raping or sexually assaulting or harassing 28 women. And the guy I argue with every other Sunday, Lance, says that it's all made up. It's all women who were paid to come forward as a political scheme by the Democrats, even though a lot of these accusations predate his political career. The first woman to come forward and say that Trump raped her was his first wife, Ivana. And that was, she probably made that accusation around 1989 or 90 in a deposition during their divorce. She explained that she'd referred him to a hair surgeon, a guy who moves your scalp around to cover up baldness. And I've had the procedures like that. And Trump came home furious because it hurt. And it does. You just went to the dentist earlier.
Yes.
It's like it's when they work on your head, it hurts. And, maybe not while they're doing it, but when the anesthetic wears off, yeah. So his head was hurting. She claimed in a deposition that he was so pissed he pushed her down, he tore out her hair, and he raped her. And I find that entirely credible, given that's not something that somebody would think to make up.
And the other thing that when Trump was running for second term, and originally it was against Biden, and he said that or I can't remember now which time he was running against Biden, and he was saying that if Biden got elected, the Wall Street would tank, and of course Wall Street had a record run up, and I think what people are most unhappy about is his promises about the economy have not been true, and he's not fulfilled any of his promises, and the people are feeling it in their pocketbooks today. And I think it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better.
So I just read an article that even with the signs of a teetering or lousy economy where inflation still 2.7, last year, Trump's first year as president, the U.S. created 584,000 jobs. This is 1/4 of the average number of jobs created per year between 2011 and 2019, which includes most of his first term.
Yeah, there are fewer jobs and more people looking for them.
Right. So, and I feel like most Americans feel anxiety.
Yes.
I mean, I do. My wife does. But there's so much shit going on. Like when my mother-in-law was suffering from Alzheimer's and got confused, her excuse was, well, there's just a lot of stuff going on. And I think we all feel that there's just so much stuff going on. It's hard to pinpoint what we should be freaking out about. And that might give Trump some insulation, because if people are confused about, everybody's, feeling nervous, but if they can't focus on Trump as the cause of their anxiety, then so this article said that the New York Times article said that the normal financial metrics that tell you whether we're poised to have a recession, those don't work anymore, because people are all freaking confused, that people feel economic anxiety, yet they're still spending. The predicted recession because of the tariffs hasn't happened. That people are still like going crazy investing in AI. It's people don't know what to think.
There's a lot of truth to that. I'm on a show called Modern Investing, and on it I talk about how people have been predicting the next recession for over 5 years, and it hasn't happened yet. Eventually, they will be right. There will be a recession, and what will cause it, we'll only learn about it later on when we look back at it. But right now, what we still see is inflation is not soaring, but it's still, there's no reason to think the prices will come down. And, with the Fed interest rates, who knows what they're going to do because he just appointed a new governor. But in any case, the employment numbers, we're not creating as many jobs as we used to. There are more people looking for jobs and can't find them. And especially if you get a higher education, you come out and there's just not the opportunities that there once were. All of these things are adding up. And there's a great deal of stress, that's financial stress, because prices, trying to buy a home, for example, can be very intimidating. It was always kind of nerve-wracking, but it's more intimidating now than it was when I was growing up. I got started and it was very, very hard to get together enough for a down payment. And, I don't even know how people can do it now. Certainly in the San Francisco Bay Area, they're almost all priced out, and even rents are catastrophically high for most people. And so we have like police officers and firefighters living pretty far away in order to serve the local community because they can't afford to live around that. It goes for teachers too. So this is, again, a general angst that's not.
With my wife and I bought our first dwelling in about 1990. And we bought a condo that her grandparents had lived in, but they aged out. We got a deal because we bought the condo from my wife's parents. We paid a little over $60 a square foot. And if you want to buy something in LA in a nice-ish neighborhood, you're going to pay $1,000 a square foot. So in 30 years, 35 years, that's a 16-fold increase in price per square foot. So you bet your ass you're going to have anxiety trying to buy something.
Right.
And the jobs that are available are, so college enrollment has declined 15% in the US between 2010 and 2022. And for a lot of people look at college and think it's not worth it. And that those people are largely boys. The college enrollment is like 60-40 women. So guys are getting left behind. And the jobs that are available are these shitty half jobs like DoorDash or Uber or OnlyFans now has 3.3 million people who are now on that site selling sexy pictures of themselves. And, and it's one of those half jobs where 95% of everybody makes like $0, and then the top 2% might make $10,000, might make $50,000 a month because they're super hot and they know how to sell themselves.
Right.
But what kind of job? There are more people selling themselves on OnlyFans than there are cops and doctors in the U.S. combined.
Shocking. And these types of statistics get to the other thing along with the angst is the numbing effect. When you hear these things, you kind of like can't absorb any more information because it get to the point of triggering a panic attack or some sort of reaction that's you want to avoid. And so you don't want to take in the information. And I find that a lot of people, not only are they afraid to roar, but they're afraid to take in the information that goes against with whatever that is that they're using to stay in their comfort zone. It's not so bad. That's what I want to tell myself. It can't be that bad. Well, when your agents are holding a person down and restraining him on the ground and people shoot at him multiple times, something is wrong. And people have to lift their voices and say that there is no more of that allowed in this country and mean it. And the politicians have to hear it, because too often we've said, well, money runs everything and there's nothing I could do about it. Well, you can raise your voice and you can protest. And you can also vote. You can get out
Well,
and vote.
we get to vote in 9 months.
Yes.
And in a lot of places, we get to vote in, I
message.
don't know, like 6 months in the primaries. But, and if you, so usually the party who has the presidency that loses control of the House at midterms because people are disenchanted. And the lower the approval of the president, the more seats are going to be lost. So right now, based on Trump's current approval, it's predicted that the House will lose, the Republicans will lose 28 seats. And they only have a margin of 2 or 3 right now. So it's
a margin now.
It's fairly certain that unless Trump really gets in there and fucks with the election mechanisms, which he will be limited in his ability to do because it's unconstitutional. The elections belong to the states. Trump says he wants to federalize voting in 15 states. Of course, they're all blue states he doesn't like. Right. But he won't be allowed to do that because it's unconstitutional. But somehow if he does, unless he's able to do something like that, or get the SAVE Act passed, which is a draconian voter verification system that could disenfranchise, for instance, married women if they can't document their whole history, how their last name changed. You know, they have to get their original birth certificate. Then they have to get some paperwork showing that they, you know, their marriage certificate, you know, you're married, right?
Yeah.
Do you know where your marriage license is?
No. I asked my wife this recently.
Yeah. So you if this act passes, you're going to have to dig up your marriage certificate if possible, or write away for it. Right. And if you're in a state that's Republican controlled, they may not want to get you that certificate in time, and you may not be allowed to vote because you don't have this documentation that, you know, your name is now Mariskovitz, but it used to be Schweister.
Yeah. And I have been saying this for a while now. You know, we're getting closer and closer to the way in the old time movies, one of the enemies were easily identified by asking, they were the ones that were saying, show me your papers. And we're almost to that point where we have to show our papers, or we're suspected, and not suspected, we're assumed that we're illegal.
We should also point out that voter fraud is almost non-existent.
Yeah, then the only real conviction has been Republicans doing it. And
okay, the deal is that the Heritage Foundation, the very conservative people who came up with Project 2025 that Trump has been following as president, they have a deal called the Voter Integrity Project, I believe they call it. And for more than a decade, they've been collecting election results that cover the past 40 years in America. And, you know, every 2 years between 100 million and 160 million Americans vote. So if you total that up over the past 20, 30 years, there have been about 2 billion votes cast in America. And in that time, the Heritage Foundation has only documented 2,000 cases of votes being cast fraudulently. That's a rate of 1 in a million, which has never been enough to flip any election. There was some voter fraud in the 1960 election between Nixon and Kennedy in Chicago, to the tune of, I don't know, maybe there was some, you know, some political machine pulled some bullshit and thousands of votes were flipped or cast fraudulently. But they looked at it, and even in that election was razor thin. And had Nixon taken, I think, Illinois, maybe, I don't know, he would have taken, anyway, they looked at it, and even with actual voter fraud, It wasn't enough to flip the state. It was so, and that was, in the Stone Ages, 65 years ago.
Right.
And since then, our voter protections and penalties have gotten, stronger.
Right.
And you have to be an idiot or misinformed to fraudulently cast a vote, because it is a high risk. If you get caught, you can go to prison for 5 years, and a low reward. The reward is, oh, you're going to cast your dead wife's ballot for somebody? Well, that means that person gets one more vote out of 300,000. Who cares? That's low reward. You're not changing anything, right, but you are running the chance that you get prosecuted. Right. So people do not do it,
right,
except when they're crazy, stupid, or misinformed. This woman went to prison because she got out of prison and she wants to vote. She calls up election officials and says, here's my deal. And they go, no, you're good. You can vote. And they were wrong. They misinformed her. I'm sure it probably wasn't malicious, but she still ended up going back to prison.
I saw that. Yeah. Hard to believe. Well, these are the things that we want to raise our voices, and occasionally we have to roar to get somebody's attention. Well, that's what we have to do. And we cannot be afraid. There's so much fear going around the country now. People, especially people who have immigrated even legally into the country, citizens are being rounded up. And they're not given the due process that we were all raised to believe that it was given to us as a right. And these seem to have been, they're not paying as much attention to the rights of the citizens as they used to. And the things that used to appall us, now we just become numb to. How could we elect a president who's convicted of 30 plus felonies? How could you cast your vote for someone like that? But, as you were saying, and I'm not thinking that they're stupid, but their sources of information may very well be skewed in one direction. And if that's the information they're getting, then we have to somehow get other voices into their world, into their experience, so that they can hear a different perspective. And
so, the voices, when you talk about roaring, people have been pissed at journalists, both legitimately and illegitimately, for a long time now, in that there's failure. I don't know why we're getting an echo all of a sudden, but the media journalists need to roar themselves. They need to be more aggressive in calling out politicians doing bad shit.
All right. And the other thing is people have been afraid of Trump if he endorses your primary opponent, for example. But that has lost its bite as well, because now some of the people that he is endorsing are losing. And more people are realizing that a Trump endorsement might mean their peril rather than their sure victory. So this is going to change, I think, in terms of people being able to speak up.
Yeah, because there's a razor-thin margin. If 2 Republicans defected to the Democrats, the Republicans would lose control of the House, right, which they will in 9 months anyway. But there's another indicator that the ruling party is going to crash and burn, and that is the number of people who are not running for re-election. And this year is setting a record. 58 senators and Congress people have decided not to run for re-election. Either they're running for other stuff like governor, or they're retiring. And that 58 is more than 10% of the House and Senate. And as I said, is a record. And it shows that people, A, they don't like their jobs because it's a shitty job the way it works now. And B, they think they might get their asses handed to them.
Well, Rick, thank you for joining me on episode 1 of this season of Roar. And I appreciate your input as I've always done. And, hopefully we can think about these things more, and we can maybe think about what is the most constructive way to get your voice heard.
Yeah.
And to raise your voice, not be afraid to raise it, even to the point where you're roaring. You're speaking out, and you're out loud. And,
right, but also to protect yourself.
Right.
Like with what happened with Alex Preddy, people were talking about the talk with Mark Lee, our producer over at Pod TV, was talking about how it's a best known in Black families where a parent will have the talk about how to behave around cops.
Yeah.
That you're not entitled to be respectful to cops, but you need to be respectful to cops because terrible shit can happen to you if you're not.
Right.
And so, yeah, you have a right to be however you want to be according to the Constitution, but in practical terms, don't be however you want to be. Be respectful. Eat some shit. If the cop's going to be a dick to you, go yes sir, yes. So if we're going to roar, we also need to look at practicalities.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's a really good way to say goodbye and think about protect yourself, but do not be afraid. And this is I'm going to take you backstage now and say goodbye to the viewing audience. But thanks again, Rick. I really appreciate it.
Surely. Thanks for having me.
Okay. All right. Well, that was Rick Rosner. And he joined me on this, the first edition of Roar, which I hope will be a year-long or a 12-episode season, as the past seasons have been on the channel, which is Air U. And I should mention that before I say goodbye. AirU.tv is the website. And let's see if I can get this scrolling across the screen. And let's see. There you go. Well, I'm rusty, but I'm not out of it entirely. info@AirU.tv. If you want to write to the show, you want to get your voice heard, write to me there, and I'll get back to you if I can. And I don't see any reason why I can't. And then we can talk about how it is that you can raise your voice, even if it's a scary voice, to be heard in this day and age where people are afraid and some people are in hiding because they don't, even if they're legitimately here as citizens, they don't trust. The breakdown of trust in our authority figures in our government has been as high as it's ever been. So don't be afraid to